We shall now move into the next item in our agenda, Fireside Chat on Community Development. The session will be moderated by Suhana Dewi Slamat, Executive Director and Head Governance, Risk and Compliance, Khazanah. And she'll be joined by Bill Walczak, President and Co-founder, Codman Academy Charter School and Chair, Boards of Bunker Hill Community College and Massachusetts Business Alliance for Education, as well as Alina Amir, Co-founder and CEO, Aros Academy.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Oh, sorry. So I wanted to set the scene for the two of you. This is a fireside chat, which means there's a fireplace in front of us. It's just the three of us. And we're having a chat. We happen to have 900 eavesdroppers, but we'll just ignore them. Okay. I'm not going to introduce the two of you because everyone can read about you in the KMF website. So instead, let's start with this for Alina to kick it off, and then Bill, please. Why build a community or where a dysfunctional or a disintegrated community exists? Why build a better one?
Okay, so I think sometimes we take having a community for granted because we might think that personal efforts or family support plays a more significant role in advancing ourselves. However, I have experienced and have seen for myself how a community that comes together, empowers each other, a community that has a collective sense of purpose, that is safe, inviting, and encouraging, can really change a child's life trajectory, especially if that child comes from a marginalized background. So when I first started teaching close to 10 years ago, I was placed in a very difficult school where most of my students were very detached from the larger purpose of education. They cannot wait for the last bell of school. They dislike school with a passion. So when I started an alternative learning space that acts like a community center where kids could come and explore learning in a way that they have never experienced before, they could come and have access to teachers, mentors, peers. They are allowed and encouraged to ask questions without fear or judgment. They really build an appetite for knowledge. They get hungry to learn more, to be more. So when I first started, most of my kids knew exactly where they did not want to be. They did not want to be in school, nor do they want to continue to pursue education. But today, most of our alumni are not just degree holders pursuing great careers. They come back for every semester break to go back into school, to speak with the young ones, encourage them to come to the center, and they teach during their free time. They organize educational field trips. They design lessons and activities exactly like how we have done it for them. They share how challenging teaching is, but most of all, they also share about how they're very inspired to do more for the community. So that's why you build better communities. When you build better communities, you get young people who cares, young people who are ambitious, and you get young people who are passionate about wanting to make the world a better place.
Thank you. Sounds awesome. Bill, I know you've done this a long time. Tell us about it.
Yes, I'm quite old. How's the sound on this? Is it okay? Can you hear? All right. If you can't hear, well, never mind. Although I was introduced as an education person, which I am, I'm actually on a whole bunch of boards as a somewhat recent retiree, and most of those boards have to do something with education. I actually spent my life in the healthcare system, and in fact, for 36 years, I was the chief executive of the Codman Square Health Center, which is a community health center. You know, they're worldwide, but in the central part of Dorchester, which is part of Boston. And I want to show you my tie here. I have a tie on. And it's a map of Boston, actually. It's a transit map of Boston. So since so many of you people seem to have some sort of connection to Harvard or MIT, you'll notice that the red line, which is a subway line, goes north to south. And on the north side, it goes to Harvard and to MIT. And then it goes south a couple of, like, say, 5 kilometers to Dorchester, which is my community and where I worked for, well, actually, I still do work there for almost 50 years now. But it's, even though it's a few kilometers away from Harvard Square, it's really a world away from Harvard. And so back in my 36 years as running this community health center, which was quite large, actually, about 400 employees, although it started with just 5 of us. One of the things that you look at when you're running a medical facility is what are the conditions of the community and what prevents health from happening. So in Codman Square, the community that I was in for, or have been in for so long, the real issues that were facing people was, access to healthcare was important. It was really important. People went to emergency rooms of hospitals to get basic care before the health center opened up. Just vaccinations, pregnancies, whatever. Emergency room was where they got care until the health center opened up. But the real concerns of it had to do with poverty and living in a very difficult circumstance. So having crime, drugs, violence, things like that happening in your community is a really overarching concern for people. And so how do you do that if your main source of service is being able to provide a medical visit to a physician or a nurse practitioner or nurse or dentist or whatever? And it doesn't work that way. So if you want to build the community, you have to start thinking outside of that box. What are you going to do? And the Codman Square Health Center distinguished itself and still continues to distinguish itself as an organization that does all sorts of other things beyond the medical model. And that includes, well, I'll tell you about a few, okay? Beyond the whole issue of, dealing with crime and violence and drugs and kids with nothing to do and poor health, educational outcomes, there's also the whole issue of, what it takes to be healthy. And what it takes to be healthy is, usually, you need to be fit. You need to have some sort of fitness regimen that you practice. You need to eat nutritious food, and you need to stay away from things like cigarettes. If you're going to live longer, if you do something like that. So I'll tell you a couple of stories about those, the last area, about how do you promote health. I saw my job as CEO as really making things happen. My job was to hire a really great staff of senior managers who ran the whole place, really. But my job was to see if I could make things happen. And so the first story I'll tell you is actually about something that the water waste group would probably like, and maybe something they ought to think about. I was approached by a guy that ran a series of grocery stores called Trader Joe's for 17 years, and then retired, went to a Harvard Business School program, where they asked him, what was it that you couldn't do anything about but wish you could have while you were CEO? And he said, as the water waste people said, that 40% of what they had, they threw away. 40% of the produce and other things were thrown away. And he said, I really didn't want to do that. And so one of the things that came up, his idea for this Harvard program, was to start a nonprofit grocery store. But he didn't know anything about low-income communities. And so that's where I came in. He called me up, and because Codman Square had a reputation for doing things outside of that medical box, he approached me, and we decided that we were going to go into a formerly abandoned building that the health center just happened to own, and put in a nonprofit grocery store in there. Now, this nonprofit grocery store only sells nutritious food. It doesn't sell anything with sugar in it or high salt content or whatever. Everything you buy there is healthy. No desserts, no sugar-sweetened beverages, none of that stuff. And so what it does is it allows people to go to a grocery store, kind of a normative thing, right? You go to a grocery store to get your groceries. But in this case, you're buying stuff, and it's a lot cheaper than you would go at a regular grocery store, about 2/3 of the cost of it. And so this has become a big deal in the United States, and there are now 5 of these stores. The first one was in Codman Square, and then 4 other ones are opening up or have opened up already. And now the next thing would be to go to another city, because these are all located in what we call food deserts, okay? So these, this is just an idea, but it solves a major part of the problem of poor health in a low-income community. The second thing I want to tell you about is this other thing, where I had this group of well, around 2000, around the year 2000, we had a tobacco settlement. You know, the tobacco companies had to pay a lot of money to states for killing off our residents. And so some of that money wound up coming into, they talked about youth, you know, doing stuff with youth. And I had this group of African-American girls. There were a couple of boys too, but the girls really ran the show. And they wanted to do something productive. So they formed themselves into this group called Bold Teens. And I took some of the dollars and I gave them stipends and I said, go out and tell people that they can't smoke anymore. You know, do something to stop smoking. And so, you know, I thought that they'd talk to their grandparents or whatever, but instead they went to the 2 pharmacies that we have in the square and started protesting out in front. And not kidding. Go out in front, tell you're not going to shop here unless they stop selling cigarettes and all that. And so I'd get these calls from the managers of the pharmacy saying, you know, Bill, what the hell? Do something about these kids. And I'd say, geez, you know, they are called Bold Teens. You know, you can't really mess with them. So in any case, they started doing it, and then they came up with a brilliant idea, which is to approach the City Council of Boston and to ask them to do something about preventing tobacco products from being sold in pharmacies. And they passed an ordinance that forbids pharmacies or any store that sells pharmaceuticals from selling cigarettes or any kind of tobacco products. This group of teenage girls were able to put an ordinance in place, and there is no pharmacy in the city of Boston that's allowed to sell tobacco, thereby kind of keeping tobacco away from people.
And that includes pharmacies in Harvard?
No, that's Cambridge.
Okay.
But, you know, it wouldn't surprise me.
Okay.
Anyway, so there's just some ideas. My job, like I said, was to try to get things to happen, make things happen, and whether it was a bunch of teenage girls that just had some great ideas, or to help an organization put a grocery store that sells healthy food, well, that's part of my job as the CEO.
Wonderful. So in the morning, we heard Prof. Stancheva talk about the tolerance of inequality, about social mobility, about opportunities. I feel that there was so much in her research that you both see in real life, and perhaps you can share with us how you see or make the opportunities in the communities you work with.
So when we first started, we chose to focus on STEM because we were surrounded by tech factories and tech startups in the area. So instead of settling with our kids wanting and aspiring to be part of the factory line, stay within the course that their parents and all the siblings have set for them, we wanted our kids to sort of explore the possibilities that they could be inventors and innovators. That was one of the reasons why one of our first programs really focused on STEM. And because of that, the first batch of our graduates actually pursued engineering and computer science as part of their tertiary diploma and degree. And because we were teaching STEM to a community that don't usually pursue STEM, we were able to work together with the Ministry of Education, MDEC, DG Telecommunications, UNICEF, to design a digital literacy learning experience that is more inclusive. Recently, we work with Vitrox, a prominent tech company based in Penang that has a huge campus, and they wanted to build the community around that campus. And so today, we get to bring our kids into the campus. Our kids get to speak to the engineers, even have classes over there. So that's one of the things we do. We connect corporate partners as well as international organizations to meet the needs of our community. So for example, when we realize that our students and their families should have personal finance skills, we designed financial literacy program with our partner from FWD Takaful. When we decided that we wanted to bring global issues into the classroom to talk about climate change, gender equality, social justice, we work with UNICEF to bring global citizenship themes into our lessons. During COVID, when misinformation was rampant within the community, we work with local journalists to design and train teachers on how to verify news and digest information. More than 4,000 teachers across the country was involved in this. And we were mentioned just a week ago at the Trusted Media Summit in Google Singapore as one of the exemplar solutions in the region to fight misinformation. This could not have happened without the community of teachers. When teachers were struggling to transition into online teaching and learning, one of the first things we did was to share everything online, put everything up, create tutorials so that teachers could upskill immediately. Within days, we saw thousands of teachers learning on our platform, not just learning, but also creating their own content, sharing it with us so that we could organize it in a digital library so that everybody could have access to it. So when we talk about community building, I think it's important not to look at it as a pyramid structure where the power is centered at the top. Rather, look at it as a constellation where power is distributed so that everybody can play a role. So similar to the work that we do in Chowkit, where we co-run an alternative learning center with an NGO on the ground called Buku Jalanan Chowkit that has done a tremendous job. We serve undocumented and stateless children there. When we first started a couple of years back, we were reminded more than once by the officers as well as the teachers around the area that these are children, these are sons and daughters of immigrants, children of drug addicts, children of prostitutes. Enter with caution and just interact with the child and not with the parents. Now, as a teacher and as a fellow human being, where there are children, there should be adult champions who root for them in the future and their future regardless of background. And to be a champion of children, you must include their parents. You cannot build communities by leaving people out. So if we had accepted that people are defined by the resources available around them or people are defined by life's circumstances, I think we would be losing out on the true potential of our young people and of our country.
I'm struck by the fact that you're not just looking at jobs pipelines or the economic community, but you're diverting a pipeline to factory workers and drug addicts and prostitutes into STEM jobs and into other jobs. Bill, I know you've done the same thing in where you work. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, sure. Well, one of the things although I always considered Codman Square Health Center to be an economic development engine rather than just a health center because we did so much beyond the medical model. I'd go to all these healthcare conferences, and this has been a very exciting conference, but most healthcare conferences are pretty boring. But one of the things we'd hear at the conference would be that we need more linguistic minority health professionals. We need more BIPOC professionals to be in your community health centers. People want to see somebody that looks like them, and yet it never came up as like, what's the solution for this? It's like, oh, we need the colleges to do something. But oftentimes, student kids that grow up in low-income communities don't have really good options for being able to get into schools that are going to produce them or make them into health professionals, which usually takes a little bit of college education or a lot of college education. So one of the things you do is, well, if we can't depend on the college system to do it, why don't we just grow our own? And so I was involved in helping to start 2 schools that, the first one is called the Edward Kennedy Health Careers Academy, and it's on the campus in Northeastern. But the idea behind it was, let's teach kids about healthcare, medical care, and get them into the positions. 18% of the jobs in Greater Boston are in healthcare. Health professions jobs pay a good middle-class wage. You want to go from poverty to the middle class. There's no quicker way than becoming a health professional in the Boston area. So the idea is to put them in a position where they're going to learn something about the healthcare system. And so the Edward Kennedy Health Careers Academy has been going now for 25 years. Producing mostly like nurses and other health professionals and allied health professions. The other one is Codman Academy, where it was actually founded by my wife, who's right in the front seat here. But
hi, Meg.
Yes, Codman Academy is a school that that is located inside of the health facility. Inside. They walk in the same hallways as the doctors and dentists and social workers and finance people and radiologists and all those other people. And so they get a sense of what it's like to be a professional. It's not specifically for health professions, it's for professions. It's for making sure that students have an opportunity to get into that. They also have they do internships inside the health center, and about 30 of the students wind up getting jobs in the summertime, paid jobs in the summertime working in the health center. And so this is an opportunity to be able to do that. That's economic development. It's taking kids from our community who tend to be very, very low income, and mostly BIPOC, actually almost all BIPOC students, African Americans and Caribbean immigrants, and giving them an opportunity to see what they can do within the healthcare system, which is the largest single sector of the Boston economy.
That's amazing, and I think we've heard so much about the good work that you both do and your achievements. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is, tell us a little bit about your challenges and your frustrations that we never hear about. Feel free to speak your truth.
Your truth first.
Okay. I have been privileged enough to have spoken at KMF 3 years ago, back in 2019. And back then, I think I remember sharing some of my challenges on the ground too. Now, I mean, who would have thought that we were just months away from chaos, and not to mention COVID. And COVID really showed how fragile our systems are. I think it's something that I think a lot of us knew already. COVID just sort of made it more obvious. And COVID really proved how important it is to build resilient communities. Now, my work mostly focused on supporting marginalized B40 children. When systems break, these are the kids who suffer the most. And in community building, I personally feel like there should be a constant flow of hope that things are going to change at a larger scale. Because every day I'm looking at my kids and I'm telling them, if you choose education, there will be opportunities waiting for you. If you are educated, you will be respected. Life can be different, things can change. But I'm not sure whether I truly believe in it when there's so much uncertainty at the systemic level. Sometimes it does feel like a lot of the work that is happening on the ground gets undone or just disappear. And I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, that, you know, we have been teaching to the test for decades. And so if you take away test, you must support our teachers on how to teach in a more engaging and inspiring way. We've been talking about how our children should be learning in an environment that is better. We've been talking about providing diverse learning resources. And we should not be introducing new policies without data or research so that we can stop introducing new things every time new faces come into power. And that children, our children are children, regardless of where they come from or their background, and we should not be selective of who we champion for. And this is, of course, on top of running a social enterprise in Malaysia, making sure that funding is sufficient, recruiting the right kind of talent to be part of the team who believes in the cause. And despite all of these obvious frustrations, I still tell my team that, you know, the work is worth it, because at the end of the day, it affects individuals. So even if you make a small crack in our students' view so that light could come in, maybe one day they can see that the horizon is much further than they previously thought it was. So maybe if I get to speak at KMF again, hopefully I will be speaking in a much hopeful tone next time.
Let's hope so. One of the things that I realize is, you know, when you talked about the fact that you worked with 4,000 teachers, and so that leverages the government system and the political system in Malaysia. And it strikes me that the American experience is very different, Bill. For some reason in America, the individual you decides that this is my life's work, and then you give of yourself to it, and you build this entire enterprise in spite of the government almost. Can you tell us a bit about why, how, and all that things?
Well, it's true that the nonprofit sector is, you know, the NGOs are largely responsible for much of the social services and things that go on instead of government, it's kind of part of just what you learn, when you're growing up. It's, the local nonprofit is going to be providing the after-school youth programs and the healthcare services and, in some cases the education as well, though that's mostly public. I think it's part of it is that, and it's true. I mean, I grew up not particularly having an idea other than I wanted to be an astronaut. I really wanted to be an astronaut growing up, and then a baseball player. But hey, it didn't work out. But nonetheless, just being able to to have an impact on people's lives is something that that's just kind of a core to making me feel good about what I'm doing. And I think that's enough an opportunity. And a lot of people go into the NGO sector because of that. They want to feel like maybe they're making an improvement on things. But in terms of like the frustration, the previous question, I got a lot of frustrations. One of the reasons why I retired was so that I could advocate in public policy, because we can do so much better a job. There's something that's called the school to prison pipeline, for failures in education. And it seems so difficult to appropriate the right amount of dollars or the right amount of services or whatever to be able to make sure that children growing up in low-income communities are able to get what they need so that they can succeed. And so part of that frustration is that, that we don't focus enough of attention on what's going to work. And so much of, the dollars that go into special programs and stuff are looking at a very, very narrow focus, very narrow focus. And I don't know if it's everywhere, but, humans seem to be very interested in just this narrow focus of what they can do, when, in fact, systemic approaches, as Hajun said yesterday, is the appropriate way of accomplishing more by pulling things together. So why don't we pull the education system and healthcare system together and after-school programs and all those things? Why can't we do the better job of making sure that there is more unified or a systemic approach to dealing with the problems that, that cause children to fail? Because if they didn't fail, we would wind up with a much more pleasant society. First of all, we would have a successful society. We would have fewer prisons and fewer problems in our cities. But it just seems as though that's very difficult. So I've spent most of the last couple of years since I retired writing critical pieces in the newspaper about what needs to change if we're going to make a difference in the lives of people that we're supposed to care about. Anyway, someday maybe we'll get to it.
And for America, do you think it will make a difference if you leverage, because it's a very different political system from Malaysia. So there's the municipality, I understand, there's the state government, there's the federal government, and how are you thinking of approaching this?
Approaching what? Change.
Systemic change.
Well,
and, or
there's
coordination.
Well, from a policy perspective, you pass policy that makes more sense. But I think the way that we need to do this, essentially by starting a movement for looking at ways in which we can make sure that children growing up in our cities are better taken care of, and actually making our cities the best places that could be for children to grow up. Right now, it just seems as though, all the economic development in the city of Boston right now is all about building luxury condos, and I'm sure that doesn't happen anywhere else. But in any case,
no, not in KL at all, no.
Right. And as a result, people wind up with, paying an enormous amount of money to live in Boston in rent. And other people have some sort of tax hedge or whatever by buying these condos. I think that there's ways in which that can be handled in a very different way by making sure that we pass ordinances. Hey, some teenage girls, African-American girls in Cabot Square got an ordinance passed. We should be able to do this for the sake of housing development, healthcare changes, all those types of things. And that's why we need to kind of pull people together and give people the ideas. One of the big issues is that it seems like in our modern world there's just a plethora of different sources of information. Oftentimes the information is like not true or planted or whatever, and we need to do a better job of making sure that we give information to people that's truthful, and also to develop the possibilities of being able to promote through our local community organizations changes in the way in which our government operates, and also to promote the community nonprofit organizations, NGOs, that are doing the good work of trying to improve the status of the lives of our children growing up in our city.
Yeah, and I wanted to pick up on that and ask Alina. You mentioned the fact that you worked with MOE, MOHE, MDEC. How was that? How did you figure out which organization or jabatan kerajaan to go to next? And what do you think are the next steps that perhaps the people in this audience could help with?
Usually, we don't go to the ministry. We would work with partners like UNICEF or work with MDEC, who has then the connection with the ministry. We don't do projects directly with the ministry. It's through our partners, government agencies, and stuff like that. In fact, to be completely honest, I would rather us go straight to the schools, go straight to the state and district offices rather than going through the federal government, because I feel like it's much faster if we were to go straight to the ground, meet with the teachers, meet with the students, and implement change immediately. Because for me, I'm very impatient. I cannot wait for letters and red tapes. Things need to happen and change today. Some people might think that, Alina, you gotta be patient. Policy change is the way to go, it's more sustainable. But I don't know, I work with the children every single day and they cannot wait.
I understand that. So we've got less than 15 minutes left, and I'm just wondering whether we have any questions from the floor or virtual questions. If none, I wanted to ask, oh, sorry, there is one. Is there one? Got it. Yes, please. Hi.
Can I just ask this question about the Malaysian education policy, which has been constantly changing? Can I find out if you see our emphasis was on the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic at one point. Now we have issues like our students who cannot express themselves in Malay, in English, and in university they allow you to answer in both languages, and they actually do that. Half a sentence in English and half a sentence in Malay. So we have this serious problem that our education policies are not being fully implemented. So we have, I was so happy to see Faisal Arif just now, so well spoken, express himself well. So while our school system, our education system, has produced people like Faisal, we also have a bulk of people who come out of our school system who cannot actually be very useful in our society because of the quality of education they are exposed to. Can I have your comments? Yeah.
I don't know whether you want to say anything, Alina, but after you say your piece, I'm also going to ask Bill to talk about maybe your experiences and some of the things that you've seen across South Africa, Vietnam, the Irish peace process and all that. So, Alina, please.
I think there's a lot of inequality in our country itself, right? Not all schools were designed the same. Not all schools are of the same quality. It really depends where you are born into, like which zip code are you from, right? If you come from marginalized background, marginalized communities, then you go to a school that is not so great. In fact, when I was a teacher, when I was teaching, that particular school was a school where the kids go to if they get kicked out from previous school. So literally, what they call themselves, they actually call themselves SMK Tong Sampah, because yes. And it so happened that the school I was teaching at, the acronym was SMKTS.
Sorry, that translates to...
School.
The school of
National
rubbish bins or something. Yeah.
Yes, and it really depends where you come from. And so most of us, I guess, are not as lucky as Faisal. I don't know where Faisal went to school at. But yeah, we need to level the playing ground.
Yeah. And I would say that one of the real serious problems is that it seems as though geography is destiny. That a lot of people who grow up in poor communities wind up being poor and not breaking out of their quartile of poverty. And so, what can you do about that? It seems as though the opportunities that are available within those geographic areas are poor. The services are poor. And so we need to reconstruct kind of how things happen. I would, like, for instance, just coming out of the pandemic. Hopefully, we are coming out of the pandemic. But the pandemic had a far worse impact on low-income communities than on middle-class communities. Among them being, actually, we had to deliver food to the families at various points. The families themselves were, couldn't take off their work to, be at home with the children who were at home because of the schools being remote. Made it really, really difficult for children to be able to stay up. So the data is all there now. The data are all showing that low-income children really fell backwards during the pandemic by not being in school for that year and a half or whatever. And so what do you do about that? I mean, there's so many important things that we need to be dealing with, and not just blaming poor people for being poor and for having lower scores to be able to get into school. So in any case, these are really important issues. If we're going to do something, we also have to recognize the fact that mental health is a major unappreciated area that needs to be heavily invested in. I think that the pandemic had a tremendous impact on everybody. But more so if you were in a situation where you knew you were falling behind because there was no computer access in your house because your mother had to be on the one computer that the household had. There were just so many things like that that impact the ability of low-income children to be able to succeed. And if we're not going to be dealing with that, then we're going to be filling the prisons.
And I just want to add that we have to support teachers in this. Teachers need to know how to handle children who comes from marginalized backgrounds. If children are going through a traumatic experience at home, teachers must be able to have the skills to support them in the classroom. We have trauma-informed pedagogies, but I'm not sure whether our teachers are trained in it to ensure that kids continue to feel safe to come to school, continue to feel safe to want to learn new things.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask about that as well. It's not just the community of kids and their families that you serve, right? Because you're also building a community of teachers, and Bill, you're building your own community of your organization. Maybe you guys can talk about that a little bit. How do you recruit? How do you find them? How do you fire up their passion? What are their challenges?
I think for me, because I am a teacher myself, there's so many challenges that I face as a teacher. And one of the things I feel like most of the times when I was teaching, I felt very alone. I feel as if I needed the support, but that support is not there. And what I think today is when I help a teacher, I want to think about how can I support you better in the classroom. As a teacher, you have hundreds of kids at one time, and you're supposed to keep track of every one of them. How do you support teacher to do this in a more effective, efficient way? And that's how we design our teaching programs. And one of the things I think that is important is that we need to have a mindset of like a farmer, not a hunter. Because you're farming and you're growing people. You're not hunting them down and forcing them to like take this on because it's good. It never works that way.
Yeah, and that works because your alumni come back and become your teachers, right?
Correct. Our students come back and become teachers themselves. We even hire parents to come back and work in our centers.
One of the great benefits of Khazanah Academy being a school located inside of a health center is about 350 students altogether. So it's a small school, but the health center has behavioral health services. And so the students have access to behavioral health services by walking upstairs to the behavioral health department. And dental services and medical services and urgent care and things like that, which are really, really important. And I think that the school of the future needs to take all of those things into consideration. It may be that our new schools that are built should be kind of community centers, that just happen to have an education part of it and a healthcare part of it and an after-school part of it and other programmatic things that are going to make a difference in making sure that children are able to succeed. Because it seems as though this system that we have that's really 100 years old or 200 years old or whatever it is just not appropriate for the modern world. And the modern world needs to have a, in the same way it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a community center to have a really good school system.
Yeah, and so we have a virtual question, which there it is up there. So Bill and Alina, I know that in Malaysia we have a lot of private schools. In the US, I'm sure you do too. Can I offer this question to both of you? Who would like to go first?
I'm not so sure about whether it impacts investment and improvements, but regardless, I think we should take this question seriously, because once people think that private schools are better than public schools, no one would send their kids to public schools anymore, and this would make public schools, it doesn't help with raising the quality of public schools. What we want is a public school that is so good that it's comparable to private schools. At this point, speak to any young parents immediately. If they have the funds, they will send their kids to private schools because they have this perception that public schools are not up to the par. But if you were to study our curriculum, if you were to look through our syllabus, they're amazing. Our education blueprint, it's really great. So it's just a matter of how do we make sure that whatever we've written on paper gets delivered in a high quality way as well.
Problem of execution. Okay.
Yeah, I just say that it seems that our segregation just gets worse and worse. People are segregating themselves by school district, for instance. There's some of the suburbs spend a lot of money on education, don't have the kind of problems that come from having poverty. There's zoning that prohibits apartment complexes in a lot of these well-off suburbs. And so it's not just the private schools, it's kind of this segregation that occurs from it. And what it does is it allows people to think, oh, well, the city schools are just for poor kids. And therefore, when my kid turns 5, I'm going to move out to one of these suburbs so that I don't have to worry about the school system. One of the things that's really sad about this is that in Boston, if you go by and you see a really nice-looking public school, it's been transformed into condos. Yeah, I mean, they took the building
you mean
and they turned it into condominiums.
Schools in Malaysia that might be transformed into shopping malls?
Into condominium complexes. And honest to God, this is, you go over and say, oh, what a beautiful school building. And then you look at it and it says, for sale. And so I think that, that we have to, and this is something I will be suggesting to our new mayor, Michelle Wu, is that we need to come up with a way in which we can position the city of Boston as a great place for children. And that's going to require a lot of changes in the way we think about public policy and about what is available. So a lot of cities around the world have made themselves into places that cherish children. And so if we want to have a city that isn't just all adults and poor kids, then we're going to have to make those kinds of transformations. And I think it's really important for all of us around the world to think about it. The last thing I'll say is that community health centers are NGOs, all right? They're NGOs. And what that means is they have a lot more capacity to do than whatever their individual thing is. Like, it's a Common Square Health Center, it's a medical facility, but that doesn't mean it can't do other things. And because it has the infrastructure to be able to do more, it has a finance department, it has HR department, it has all these different departments, it means that it can add additional services if they're not already available in the community. or partner with other organizations to do it. And that to me is a big missed opportunity when we take a look at these things and say, oh, that's just a health center, it only does medical services. No, it doesn't have to. It can add a grocery store.
That flex, very nice. We haven't touched upon some of the other things that are of relevance to your work. So for example, the racial lines and other things like that. So that's going to be covered in day 3 of KMF. That's happening tomorrow, I believe. No, Nick says no, sorry, that's not happening. So that's all the time we have. No, he says it's not happening. That's all the time we have for now. And so that ends our session. Thank you so much, Bill and Alina. A round of applause, please, for them.
Thank you.